Tina Meyer and her family have also been deeply affected by the real-life consequences of cyberbullying. Her then 13-year-old daughter started an online relationship with a so-called boy. Her daughter was soon rejected by him and told that the world would be a better place without her. Tragically, Megan believed that, and with her mom and dad just steps away, she hung herself in her bedroom closet. She was just weeks away from her 14th birthday. Tina is now on a mission to ensure that her daughter's death was not in vain. She heads up the Megan Meyer Foundation. It's an organization dedicated to promoting awareness and education about issues surrounding bullying and cyberbullying. Joining Tina is Dr. Jana Juvonen, a professor of psychology at the University of California, Los Angeles. She's also an expert on bullying and frequently advises schools on anti-bullying programs. The co-author and co-editor of 3 books, including Peer Harassment in School, The Plight of the Vulnerable and the Victimized. Her research is often cited in scholarly discussions on bullying, and I want to welcome both of you to the broadcast. Tina, first, before I even begin, I want to express my condolences. I have a daughter. I know that we have a lot of parents watching this show, and your loss, unspeakable. And yet, in many cases, your story is a little bit different than some. I mean, a lot of parents are really unaware of what's going on, but you were monitoring things. You were on top of things, weren't you?
You know, I was definitely a mom who wanted to know who she was talking to. I even had Megan's password online. I had to approve any content that went on it. I'm not saying that those are the exact ways to handle everything in our world today, but back then I definitely had control of it as much as I could have control of it. And I did that because why? I just wanted to protect her. I was concerned about sexual predators at that time. Certainly did not think about cyberbullying or somebody posing as somebody else. I was concerned about sexual predators, and that was my main reason for being pretty strict with all of that.
So if you're out front on this, and we know Megan's story, what does that tell us about what's going on out there?
I think that if we are as parents, so stressed out and worried about every single aspect of any social media, we're going to drive ourselves crazy. I think that what we're doing is really, with foundations like mine and all of the studies that are being done, is really finding ways to be able to get students to understand the consequences from their actions online. We always talk to parents about, yes, be interactive, understand what your kids are doing, understand social media, but we also have to be able to bring that education and awareness to kids to understand the consequences, and that's where I think our foundation and many other great organizations out there are really trying to educate and raise awareness to kids so they understand.
Dr. Juvonen, I noticed when she said we as parents were going to drive ourselves crazy, you were nodding. How is the cyber world different from just bullying as we know it?
Here's the dilemma. So on one hand, today's teenagers, they are saying that they have easier time to convey their innermost secrets and feelings online than in a face-to-face situations. So they reveal a lot about themselves online. So they give a lot of material to those who are in the position who may want to hurt them. And it is much easier online to hurt somebody's feelings because you now abuse the material that where some kids have posted. And you don't really think about its consequences, like Tina said.
But if you and I are sitting in a room together, there's an automatic filter. I'm not going to say as hurtful things. There's this veneer that the internet provides, correct?
Absolutely. So you're hiding behind your screen. You don't see the reactions of people when you do things, whether you're posting very private information about yourself or when you're abusing somebody else's information to be mean to them. So that's what makes it particularly detrimental. And then when kids encounter something online, the last thing they're likely to do is to tell their parents. Why? Because the parents would take their privileges away. Teenagers are privy to they don't have to tell everything to their parents. They need to
They hardly tell us anything. What are you talking about?
We don't have to know about everything, but then what needs to be understood between the teenager and the parent, that there's a good level of trust. And again, what is definitely needed is these open conversations about what goes on. And I think actually one of the best things that parents can do is, if they don't know what the kids are doing, say, hey, show me, how does Instagram work? You know, so what's with that tweeting? So what do you actually do? Can you show me? And get involved in kids' lives from that perspective, not from the perspective of I want to spy you as a parent.
Right. Tina, let me ask you, because I think some of the folks watching this may not be familiar with your daughter's story, because it's more complicated than just a 13-year-old and another 13-year-old. Your case is interesting in that we have adults involved as well. Can you describe what happened?
Sure. My daughter, Megan, was 13 years old and wanted a MySpace. She wanted to be like all of the other kids and start socializing. So I did under really strict rules, and Megan befriended a boy by the name of Josh Evans. She talked to Josh for about 5 weeks. The 5 weeks were normal conversation. She thought he was cute, vice versa. And then on October 15th, 2006, she received a not nice message. The next day, it was a Monday, October 16th, 2006, she came home from school, started getting some horrible messages from Josh. Megan started defending herself, fighting back. I was talking to her, trying to explain to her about the going back and forth, that the war of words never works, and that we really should have talked about this before she started battling back. Megan got upset, ran to her room. I went to talk to her dad in the kitchen. 20 minutes later, I just had a horrible feeling. I ran up to Megan's room, found Megan hanging in her closet. We called 911. Megan was transported to Children's Hospital in St. Louis in a coma, but 24 hours later, Megan passed away. We found out 5 weeks after this, what had taken place, that Josh Evans account, Josh never existed. Josh was actually the creation of Lori Drew, an adult neighbor that lived 4 houses down the street, her daughter, Sarah, who had been friends with Megan since the 4th grade, and another 18-year-old girl that worked out of that mom's house part-time. The reason is Megan and Sarah's friendship really kind of dissolved in 7th grade. The mom or the daughter heard that Megan had called her daughter some names, and they created this account to really gain Megan's confidence to find out, was she talking about her daughter? And so, unfortunately, Megan took her own life over a complete hoax. And, you know, it's why it's been now my life's mission for the past 7 years to really travel the country and share Megan's story as really a gateway to get students and parents and adults to listen about these consequences, that they're real. And then from that, really then start educating and talking about empathy, talking about the consequences that can happen not only to them, but also to the other students when we don't know what is going on in their life, what are those other circumstances. And many times kids just say it, they're done with it, and they think it's not a big deal until it affects them. It'll be my life's mission for the rest of my life to be able to continue to help give children voices and raise awareness and education.
Dr. Juvonen, I think Tina's just remarkable, because I know that there are a lot of parents who would just get stuck in the rage and the anger, and yet she's taken this horrible incident in her life and turned it into something really positive. Talk to me about what this does to a child's development in terms of their psyche. I mean, what does it do to the kids?
So long-term consequences, what do we know about bullying in general, is that these kids, you know, you typically when we talk about teenagers, the most important thing during teenage years is to be approved by your peers, to have friends, to have some status. And therefore, the worst thing is that you are now the laughingstock, you are stigmatized, you are rejected by your peers. So that is the most important thing, is going to obviously have consequences for your self-esteem. But it also may bias your perceptions about future relationships. So we know that some of the kids who have, who get bullied repeatedly, whether it's online or in person, they start blaming themselves. And once they blame themselves, they become very depressed. And now what we're talking about is you've changed the way that that child views the world, anything bad happens, it's my fault. And you're going to get into this, escalating problem of something bad happens, I blame myself, I feel depressed. Because I'm depressed, I'm not likely to have friends, I'm more likely to be targeted. So it's not difficult to understand why some of these bullying experiences, especially when they are repeated during adolescent years, why they may have lifelong consequences.
Well, let me talk to you about action. Adults want to take action. We're not just talking about parents, we're talking about states. I think there's 13 states that now have these laws on the book. Is that enough? Should there be more recourse? What needs to be done? And Doctor, why don't I begin with you? And Tina, I want you to chime in on this as well.
Yeah, I think that, again, laws are needed, and they can operate at the state level, at the federal level, and they are there to punish people like the neighbor in this case, we hope. But what you really want to do is educate kids, and I think, again, what Tina is doing, what you're doing, Tina, in schools is wonderful. It's that awareness training so that kids in schools learn to think about the consequences before they act. So that's number one thing. But then we have to take also a second step where we teach kids what they can do. And not only how to protect themselves, but also how to protect one another. Because what we've learned about bullying is not an individual problem of a particular kid, but bullying is a collective problem. So the bystanders who are witnessing these incidents, when they don't do anything, when they just stand there, or when they spread the rumor online, they are actually reinforcing bullying. That's when the bully feels so very mighty and powerful, and when the victim feels so very little and powerless. So what we have to empower is the bystanders to act, because they really can make a big difference. But kids don't know how to stand up for the victim. They don't, we have to teach them strategies. And again, these strategies are going to vary depending on the age of the kids.
Tina, what about your feelings on this? Laws on the books, what would an ideal law look like to you? Do you think that the states are doing enough here in the United States?
You know, I helped get the law in the state of Missouri passed, Senate Bill 818, back in August of 2008. And to date, there has not been a case that's been prosecuted. So while I think that laws are important to be able to make sure that we all have limits, we understand consequences, we've realized that laws are not going to, they don't scare these children. Children are smart. They know that, well, listen, so-and-so has done it 20 times and nothing's really happened. So I think that laws, while they're important, it's really important to have clear guidelines within those schools, making sure parents are updated, students are updated, and educators have in-person training, not just online training, so that they are supported, but they also know what to do. And we just want to make sure that kids have the support, parents have the support, and so do the educators.
Dr. Juvonen, we've talked a little bit about the United States. Let's talk about some other countries. Give us your, just broad strokes, what countries are really drawing awareness to cyberbullying, would you say?
Well, this is what I find very interesting. In the early 1990s, when we started doing bullying research here in the United States, we actually started by first doing a quick analysis of newspapers, major newspapers. We knew that bullying at that time had been recognized as a problem in Japan, and I had a student who was interested in the cultural issues regarding bullying in Japan. We did analysis of major newspapers in the United States and in Japan, analyzing how often they talked about, how often they had a story about bullying. And in around 1993, what we found that during that 1 year, there were 20 times as many news stories in Japanese newspapers about bullying than in the United States. In the United States, almost every single news report about bullying was about bullying in Japan. And that tells us how far we've come since early 1990s. Today, public is well aware in the United States about bullying and its harmful effects. But what I find very interesting here is it was Japan and the Nordic countries in Europe, Norway and Sweden, Finland, that were leading the way on us understanding the plight of the victim. And I think it's not a coincidence. These countries are ethnically very homogeneous, and that's where the victim has no escape. So today we are in a different landscape, and again, there are lots of different countries who are on board. This is a global problem. Bullying is something that cuts across culture, race, and socioeconomic status. It may look different in different parts of the world. It may look in different kinds of school environments, even in the United States, but the effects are very similar. And actually, a very interesting story about that is, again, when we started doing this research, one of the common assumptions guiding these school-based programs on bullying had to do with, well, we just have to fix the bully. We have to figure out why they're doing these mean things. And the assumption was that these are kids with low self-esteem, and that low self-esteem is the reason why they bully. Research has now shown that bullies often have inflated self-esteem. They feel very good about themselves. Why? Because they are able to put somebody down, and then they get that approval from their peer group.
So it gives them a sense of power.
Absolutely.
Tina, as we close, your thoughts for parents watching this broadcast?
If your child is the target and they are struggling, my suggestions are write down everything that you're aware of, take screenshots if it's anything on text messaging, iPads, I don't care what social media. Take screenshots of what negative things are being said. Then you can sit and talk to your child about what are some steps to do. Contact the school, but make sure that you understand when you go into the school, again, keep your voice and everything level, because you go in there, start ranting and screaming and yelling, and all of a sudden the schools start pulling back. If your child is starting to exhibit any signs showing that they are starting to withdraw, showing that they are any signs of depression, grades are dropping, they're not wanting to be a part of the family anymore, anything that you're showing any signs, go to their pediatrician or pediatric office, seek outside counseling to help them cope with some of these skills that will help them in the long run, but to be able to work through some of these things so they have some resilience. The other thing is, if your child is the aggressor, don't panic and scream and yell and say, don't you know the tragedies that can happen, because that's not really going to help. Again, it is talking to your school, making sure, going to the pediatric office, seeing what some things are doing, going to counseling to talk about some therapy to help them, because your child, we really talk about instilling empathy to get them to understand stepping in somebody else's shoes. Sure. And so I think number one is just not panicking and taking those proper steps.
Tina, thank you so much. And again, we have tremendous admiration for what you're doing after all that pain in your life. Again, thanks so much for joining us, Dr. Uven, and thank you as well. Very enlightening. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Coming up next, this week's full-frame close-up on an artist whose own experience with bullying inspired a personal quest to define identity.